Hi, welcome everybody. So good to have you here. There will be more people coming in. There always are. Um, we're ICUJP Interfaith Community United for Justice and Peace. I'm Carol Francis Likens. I'm the facilitator for today. We're going to be hearing from Phil. He's going to give us a reflection a little later. And so glad you're all here. I want to let you know that in the email that you got about today's event, there was a little note on the bottom about how you can donate, because we are a small organization. We don't depend on corporate or millionaire donations. We depend on people like us. So anything you can give, we really appreciate. Okay, Phil, a reflection.
I I am reflecting. Okay. Um, yeah, I'm just doing a retrospective out of my head about how I have become an anti-racist. Uh, I began life as a non-racist, and I learned much later that my father was an active anti-racist, but he didn't talk about it. And by that, I mean that he was in the late 40s. He was organizing people in the Black community in Pasadena to develop a credit union that would provide for real estate loans to Black people in Pasadena.
Uh,
And later he became active in, or he was working for the American Friends Service Committee, and his job was to be an advocate for the Japanese community that was being interned in 42. And I just was aware of these things, but we didn't have a word for anti-racism then. Uh, but it was a role model in my head that stayed with me and developed in various ways. Um, the my first real experience becoming an anti-racist was when I was living in Berkeley when I was 20 years old in 1959, 60. And I was living in an AFSC residential intern program and in community services. And turns out my roommate was a guy I had met some years ago, brother of a Black Quaker lady that we knew. And we became fast friends and roommates. And when the program was over, we decided to go find a apartment together in Berkeley. And we ran into a lot of discrimination. And when we went together, or if Charles went alone apartment searching, we'd get we'd get a no. And so we broke up. And I started doing some on my own, and it was only through my white face that we found a place to live in an area we wanted to live. Um, and so that was kind of my first experience to actively trying to be an anti-racist. Um, so later during the time that Charles and I were living in Berkeley together, the Nashville sit-ins uh, that you all know were kind of being orchestrated by Jim Lawson in Nashville. And we were in the Black community, and we kind of identified with that, and there were a bunch of people in the Black community in Berkeley who formed their own core, Congress on Racial Equality, stumbling, and started doing some protests and sit-ins with businesses in Berkeley that were practicing discrimination. And so Charles and I got on board with that and joined CORE and started being active with the racism in the retail community in Berkeley.
Friday or Saturday, you don't even have to ask.
What's that?
That's all they say.
I can't hear what you said, but it's all right. And anyway, moving fast forward to 1965, I was working in the child welfare programs in Eureka, California, way up north. And part of our jurisdiction in child welfare was the Indian community or the Native American community in the Hoopa tribe. Was one of the largest tribal reservations in California. And so working the Hoopa Valley Reservation in child welfare was a little bit problematic at times. And I got real sick of the racism being expressed by my coworkers when they had cases out in the Hoopa Valley. And so I went to my my supervisor and I said, look, give me that territory because I don't like how the rest of my cohorts are handling it. And so that was kind of one of my first overt acts of stepping forward into anti-racism. Many years later, found myself in Eureka, working in the Hispanic community in Boyle Heights, and start becoming aware of the police brutality, the not quite the right word, but anyway, beating up and shooting Black people for being Black. And so I joined a group, two groups involved in that at the Unitarian Church in Pasadena. And one of those groups we called Embracing Diversity, which was just trying to raise the whole racial consciousness of the Unitarian community. And the other was a direct response to police shootings in Pasadena. And all of a sudden I'm stumbling over the words we called it. But anyway, but we were actively working with city council and other organizations in Pasadena to challenge police policies around traffic stops and violent encounters. And anyhow, so somewhere following that, I got involved in an outfit called Leadership in I'm sorry. Yeah, anyway, leadership and interracial anyway, I'm sorry, I'm fogging out on that acronym on there. Anyway, it was a program that was basically about building consciousness and capabilities for direct involvement in racist and racial situations. And I was challenged in that, and that mostly because of my naivety. And I had one of the staff people there. It was leadership and interethnic relations, LDIR. Anyway, and one of the staff people there was a very outspoken young Black man, and he challenged me. He even called me a racist one time, and I what? And couldn't figure that out. And he developed a little blog in which he talked about racial issues in his blog. And I was following him, and I kind of developed a mindset that I was determined to follow his stuff and listen. But my internal reaction was often, God, he's over the top. And I kind of began to question that within myself. And no, he's not over the top. I'm somewhere underneath the top. And so I deliberately listened to try to educate myself into issues from a Black perspective. Um, and and then along came 9/11 and ICUJP, and we began standing up with our feet in in support of the Muslim community after all the anti any anti-Muslim stuff that was going on in the country. And so that kind of rounded out my my anti-racist agenda. And so now I'm pretty much getting involved in the material or the activity around the Gaza genocide. And it's all a fit. And so I'm trying to advocate with my feet and online and verbally, and just be out there, be out front about the whole racist tabloid that we're dealing with here. So, that's kind of my journey. And I hope it's interest or value to somebody. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. It was really good to hear your personal stories, and we can relate to them. Even though I certainly wasn't raised with a father that was an anti-racist. Anyway, thank you. And we're going to move into our the main part of our forum today. Two women who are founders and leaders of the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Institute, which is being sued for mentioning and dealing with Israel and Palestine as part of their ethnic studies, which I'm sure we're all going to relate to. Lupe Cordona has been an ethnic studies, as social studies and theater educator for 23 years. And she's chair of the Association of Raza Educators, LA, co-founder of Socio, LA, member of the Ethnic Studies Now Coalition, and founding member of the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum and Coalition. And the two of them are going to talk about why there is this Liberated Ethnic Studies program. Teresa Montano is grassroots organizer in the Chicano community, co-chair of Southern California Latinos for Jesse Jackson, and was a coordinator of the JJ88 campaign in East LA. And that was a great campaign, one of the highlights in my life. And she is a professor of Chicana studies with an emphasis in education at CSU Northridge. And so take it away, Teresa and Lupe.
Okay. Thank you for having us. Lupe, you want to start us off?
Sure. I'll do my best. So I'll speak for myself, and then Teresa can come and kind of iron it out and clean it up a little bit. I am a mentee of Teresa's. We met a little over 20 years ago when I first started my teaching career back in the year 2000. And I am so blessed to be her mentee. In a lot of ways, I see myself in her, but of course she has really small, big shoes to fill. And essentially, the way that we came to know each other was because I deliberately chose to be in a social justice oriented teacher credential program that at the time was a concerted effort between UCLA and UTLA, and Teresa was one of the professors there. And so when we first, came together, she had to defend me immediately because I was in my very, very first years of teaching when September 11th happened. And, like you all, I am very much about peace, anti-war. In my life and in my, my infancy, have been a part of the Chicano moratorium, commemorating the fight for peace against the war in Vietnam. My father, in the 10th anniversary of that in 1980, was a speaker there. So I was a youngster there, learning about this notion of peace and solidarity in the world. And then as an adult, I was on the Chicano Moratorium Committee. So I've been very much anti-war. So when September 11th happened, and I was hearing both on my school campus and everywhere else in the world, as you all know, a lot of really racist things being said, a lot of illogical sort of thinking. And so I really wanted to bring to my students not so much a indoctrination or perspective, but really like critical thinking. Let's look at what's going on in the media. I was driving when the news broke out about September 11th. By the time I got to my school campus at that time, I was teaching at San Fernando High School. I rolled over the big TV because, technology was a little different back then. And I organized my little rabbit ear foil receptors, the antenna, and I logged onto the news, and I was already hearing Osama bin Laden. So in my mind, I was like, is that even enough time to definitively investigate? But yet we're already. So I just wanted my students to really kind of look at those things and come to their own conclusions. And so that resulted in me getting pushed out of my my very first teaching job. And Teresa used all of her power as a union leader to help me navigate that. And so because of that, that sort of intervention, here I am in my 24th school year still as an educator. And so because of my upbringing and because of my own conviction, my quest for peace, my quest for love, my quest for bringing that to, as many people as I can, has really resulted in me furthering my studies as a Chicano studies educator and ethnic studies. And so that brought Teresa and I back together again in the year 2019 to work on the California Department of Education's ethnic studies model curriculum that came from AB 2016. She and I had already been, she's been in the fight for ethnic studies a lot longer than I have, but in this kind of new wave of a resurgence of the fight for ethnic studies, she and I had both been a part of that, politically on the grassroots, just really trying to get this to the students of California. And so we then were appointed to this advisory committee in Sacramento, and we were given 2 days in February of 2019, 2 days in March, 2 days in April to advise on this curriculum, right? It's a model curriculum. It's not a mandate. It's not like you have to teach this, but it was a model. And we continuously, along with all the others on the committee, it was a racially and ethnically diverse committee. We continuously said that there's a lot of holes in this, it's missing a lot. And so we tried to improve and work on and make truer to ethnic studies what was there. But we kept saying we need more time. And we were met with, sorry, AB 2016 did not allot the funding for more time. Mind you, we were not paid to be on this committee. What they were paying for was, I guess, their staff to facilitate and our hotel and airfare, which, by the way, they took forever to reimbursed for. But nonetheless, we had to go there on our own time. And so there were areas that we thought were specifically missing, like Central American studies. You know, as you all know, there's a large Central American community in LA and beyond. And we as Chicanas really wanted to be in solidarity and ensure that there was more Central American content. And then of course, there was no Arab American studies at all. And we had a committee member with us, Samia Shoman, who is Palestinian. And so in the discussion that we were having at the CDE, which is on record, you know, we were told no more time. So what they said to us is, if you go back to your hotels, you cannot work together because you're sworn in, so you can't work together, but you can individually work on lessons, submit it as public comment, and then we can consider adding it to the curriculum. And so that's essentially what they did. And then I can pass it to Teresa to kind of pick up from there what happened after that.
I think that the beautiful part of being on the Model Curriculum Consortium, and you know, when we walked into the room, because it was a state-appointed committee, I think all of us were a little bit suspicious. Oh, come on, this is the CDE. Are they really going to let us do ethnic studies the way we think it should be done? You know, critical, counter-hegemonic, right? From the voice of communities of color. But when we saw who was in the room, we were really pleased because we knew that the folks in the room came from that background. And so when the concept or the idea came up of, well, we need to add Central American studies and we need to add the voices of Palestinian students to ethnic studies, none of us, not a single one of the 21 people in the room questioned that. We immediately went back and said, well, let's figure out how to do this. We put it into the curriculum last minute. Without ever vetting it, without ever discussing it, without ever refining any of it. And it went forth without any opposition at all whatsoever until the very, very last minute. So I think it's important for us to say to you all today is that we've been doing this work and standing in support of including Palestinian voices in the ethnic studies model curriculum way before October 7th, right? This was something that we knew that was right and that was just and had to be done. At the very last minute, there was opposition from the Jewish Legislative Caucus, right? Similar to today, if you saw the legislature this last round at the very beginning of the legislative agenda, they put out a multi-page letter challenging ethnic studies. They're specifically looking at challenging those of us in the field of ethnic studies in the CSU, in the UC, and in particular Liberated. And it's only for one reason. When you go to our website, and we'll give you our website, you'll see the beautiful lessons that the 40 plus members of Liberated have written. And I always say Liberated is our heart work, right? Being a professor is my head work. My heart work is there too because of my students, but that's my job, right? Liberated ethnic studies is where I put my heart and my years of experience developing lesson plans on people who have been invisibilized in this country and whose stories have not been told and are not a part of the mainstream curriculum, right? That's what we were doing here. And I think everyone in that room felt that way. Then all of a sudden, the only thing that was challenged, and I always think about Mark Lamont Hill's, and I forget the other author's book about the exceptionalism of Palestine. The only thing that was challenged, we had Black Lives Matter in the curriculum. We had the Chicano moratorium in the curriculum. The only thing that was challenged was the inclusion of lessons about Palestine. Right? We continued to persist as a committee that this needed to be in there, right? Even if we're no longer on the committee, we insisted that these voices be included. We demonstrated that the Asian American Studies organization, the discipline of the Asian American Studies organization, includes Arab Americans. We used everything we could to make sure that these voices were included. And at the end, when it looked like it wasn't going to be included, all 21 members signed a letter to the CDE and asked that our names be removed from the document. We didn't want anything to do with what was being finalized, right? Now, to this day, anything we do isn't aligned to that document. It was never meant to be the template for ethnic studies. You know, we use the document as a starting point. After that, we continued to add Palestinian voices and Palestinian lesson plans and do the work around ensuring that Palestinian students in California and around the world be given the just self-determination that they deserve. We eventually were sued, Lupe and I, and Cecily Myrick-Cruz from UTLA. And we were sued on the basis of we were making, first, mind you, we're not teaching in LA Unified, right? We're teachers, but we're not teaching this curriculum. Liberated Ethnic Studies goes all over the place, all over the country, all over the cities, in districts, in unions, teaching our lessons, but we never explicitly had a teach-in in LA Unified on Palestine. But we did hold with UTLA's DASA Ed Committee a forum similar to this, a forum on the right of teachers to teach Palestine, right? Again, way before October 7th. And we were sued. We were called anti-Semitic. If you read the lawsuit, you know, the convoluted lawsuit, it asks the judge to align the definition of similar to issues that we're fighting today, but this was way before October 7th, right? Trying to get the judge to determine that being anti-Zionist is being anti-Semitic. That's actually in the court case. And subsequently, like I said, Liberated is our heart work, so we do a lot of this work for free. We have originally asked us to come in to work with them on curriculum, but because of the lawsuit and because of the accusations of anti-Semitism, we have lost contracts, right? We have lost contracts. Many of our teachers who teach authentic ethnic studies just yesterday received a message from a Vietnamese teacher in California who taught a lesson on Palestine, who was concerned that she was going to lose her job because her district received a Public Request for Information Act on her curriculum. She showed us her curriculum. She was very careful to point out both positions, but the danger here is twofold. One is when you stand up for those who are oppressed in ethnic studies, and that's a part of what ethnic studies is. It's always been a part. It's kind of like what Phil said. It's always been a part of ethnic studies to be pro people of color, pro marginalized, pro invisible voices. But it's also not just a course, right? It's a movement. It's not just a moment. It's not just a bill. When we saw that the Jewish Legislative Caucus was successful in adding the guardrail language that was originally put into the legislation to protect GLBTQ students and use it to silence ethnic studies folks, we were appalled. Right? And that's exactly what they're using to silence the voices around Palestine today, claiming that if you teach about Palestine, if you teach about Arab American studies, you are being discriminatory, you are being racist, and you are being bigoted. And districts are buying that message. And so we continue to do the work that we need to do. Liberated Ethnic Studies has grown You know, we're now 50 people across the state writing these lessons, holding writing clinics, holding sessions in LA and in Fresno, because teachers want to know. Teachers in their heart of hearts always want to do what's best for students. And they're asking us, why? Why are they so afraid of us teaching about Palestine? What about the history in Palestine and Israel do they not want us to know about? Right.
Mhm.
So we've gotten even more requests recently than ever before. Parents, I met with a group of parents just last week who are saying, my son's principal wants me to help them develop curriculum so that my children feel welcomed in their school. Will you help us? Right. So in spite of all the attacks, in spite of the lawsuit, you know, it hasn't stopped us. It's still looming there. We still don't know what's going to happen with it. You know, everyone hates being labeled anti-Semitic, especially if you're not, right? But we also, you know, we also believe in peace and justice for everyone in the world, including, you know, those at the very margins. And so I think we want to stop and allow for like questions and discussions and conversations. That's why we didn't bring a PowerPoint, because we want to really engage in a conversation with you all, and answer any questions that you might have about us. We can share our work. You can go to our website. There's a meme for the Liberated 2. We've not, which is really funny for us, right? We're now the Liberated 2 and the series that we'll be offering in LA soon. Yes.
That was fantastic. You certainly didn't need a PowerPoint. Before I call on anybody, I just want to say, it's just as a retired teacher that taught in Watts, and you know, ethnic studies, I don't know if I even heard the word then, for most of my career, but you know, I had Black and brown students, and I was teaching in such a way to get them to understand each other, and that's amazing. I remember years ago, you had to sign a loyalty oath to become a teacher. And now it seems like you have to sign a loyalty oath to the state of Israel to be a teacher and not get taken down for it. So starting with Steve.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. And it links into so many issues that ICUJP cares about. Kind of a two-part question. I would like you to trace, I am a retired lawyer, so these things interest me. If you trace what has become of the lawsuit, have there been motions to dismiss? Is it still pending? What approach are you and your lawyers taking in opposing the lawsuit? I think that's very revealing. And I gather there were accusations that the Liberated Ethnic Studies curriculum itself had ignored the history of Jews in America as a minority, as a vulnerable group, and the whole question of anti-Semitism throughout American history. So can you address how your curriculum actually address that versus the accusations that are being made against you?
Teresa, I can answer the first part if you want to answer the second part of the question.
Okay, go ahead.
So Teresa and I were served in 2022. Very like improperly served, but nonetheless, we were served in 2022. And our lawyer is a pro bono lawyer. His name is Mark Kleiman. He has other folks on his team, but he has been you know, defending us, and he did file a motion to dismiss. There's I think the proper word is like a stay on discovery. because if we were to have to provide every text message, email, lesson plan, I mean, like, just if I were to type into my computer ethnic studies alone, there would be thousands of hits, and then that would be for like all 40 of us in Liberated Ethnic Studies, where we would have to do such a thing. And so there's a stay on that, because that would be very, very, very costly, because of the fact that for every text message you submit, every discovery, it has to be formatted in a proper way for the court. And then we've had several hearings set on the calendar, and then we find out right up to that week that they're canceled. In September of this year, or not this year, but last year, 2023, in September, we received a notice that the judge was saying, I'm going to say it in the non-technical terms, but essentially that the plaintiffs could no longer leave the Jewish parents as anonymous, that they had to name people on the lawsuit. And so they had until October 1st to do that, or the case would be dismissed with prejudice. And I think what happened was they responded that they were going to amend, and then they did amend, and on October 8th. And so when they amended, they included October 7th in that second amended document. And so they added names, but the names are, to my knowledge, are actual teachers. These are a few teachers that are part of an organization that they created called UTLA. So it's like a play on UTLA, UTLA. And so they've added their names. And then, so then that's when the judge set the new date, which we were supposed to, we thought we were going to go to court finally for a hearing. That was December 19th. And so at this juncture, we have the motion to dismiss, and our Mark Kleiman also filed an anti-SLAPP motion as well. So right now we're in limbo, because December 19th they canceled that hearing, and so we're just waiting. We have people like almost daily asking, like, what's going on with the lawsuit, and we don't have an answer. We're waiting. So I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, although I wanted to be one as a child. So I did my best.
I think we need more teachers than lawyers. Thank you. But quick follow-up. I know Mark Kleiman. That's great that you have him as pro bono counsel. He's a terrific lawyer. And the case is pending in a state court or a federal
court.
Federal court. Okay. Thank you for that very much.
So let me answer.
Do you mind? Let me just add one more part. The plaintiffs, the two lawyers that brought the case up and had anonymous, like Jane Doe's or John Doe's, they are a couple. The husband has filed many federal lawsuits across the country, and I think probably has pending lawsuits, including a lawsuit for Trump claiming election fraud. So these are the kinds of folks that are filing this lawsuit against us.
Do you know the names of those lawyers?
Marcus.
Yes. Marcus is the last name.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah.
It's the Deborah Project. So they came up with the organization called the Deborah Project just to sue us. So let me answer the second part of your question in 4 parts. One is the issue within ethnic studies and the implementation of ethnic studies in California is actually 2 separate bills. One is AB 1460, right, which is the graduation requirement in the CSU, which specifically calls out 4 disciplines: Asian American, African American studies, American Indian Native American studies, and Chicano Latino studies. Right. So when we were called in to do AB 14, the 2016, those were the 4 disciplines that we were asked to concentrate on, right? And in the field of ethnic studies, those are the disciplines that comprise ethnic studies. If you study the Asian American Studies Association, in the Asian American Studies group, they include Arab American Studies along with Japanese American Studies and other disciplines as a part of Asian American Studies. So when we developed the curriculum, we looked at those 4 disciplines in developing our curriculum, right? We too did a lot of soul searching and investigation about whether we would, which is not our field of expertise, whether or not we would include Jewish studies in as one of the fields. And we actually met with Jewish scholars throughout the entire country, right? And Jewish rabbis, and they basically shared with us, again, not my field of expertise, right? And Jewish studies exists on my campus. I spoke to folks in Jewish studies on my campus who made it clear that they do not want to be a part of ethnic studies, that their trajectory as a discipline is very different, right? They began, and again, paraphrasing here, their trajectory began, post World War II, prior to World War II, after the Holocaust, when they began to come together as Jewish scholars to put out the word about, the Jewish diaspora throughout the world. And in many cases, it's part of religious studies. It's not a part of ethnic studies, but that's a complex go around why it's not a part of ethnic studies. The other thing, though, that we do include, and we want to make this very clear, is that when each of us within our own disciplines looks at the diaspora, like when I look at Chicano studies, right, or my colleagues in Black studies look at Black studies, there is no way that they can address issues of the diaspora or who their people are without addressing the Jewish communities within our own community, right? So I have to, in good conscience, talk about, the role that Jews played in, for example, when I talk about the Zoot Suit riots, right? And bring in the role of Jewish activists and scholars, Jewish activists, maybe mainly in the Zoot Suit riots. When we talk about the farm workers, how could you not talk about, white and Jewish allies within the field of ethnic studies, right? So it's not the discipline itself is not a part of our work, but the stories and the contributions they made to each of our communities is definitely a part of our work, right? It's the solidarity work. And when we address the isms, right, the areas of oppression, right, the marginalization, when we start to look at how we build bridges, we do talk about anti-Semitism. You can't talk about Islamophobia and, linguicism and racism without talking about the role that anti-Semitism has played in marginalizing. So we do it in that way. But Jewish studies per se, a lesson on Jewish Americans, that's not going to be in our curriculum, right? And the last thing that, Carol Francis and Andy know this, because they were classroom teachers, right? Whenever I teach or we teach in our classroom, we make sure that all of our students' voices are centered in the curriculum, and we make connections to who they are, whether or not we're teaching Chicano studies or ethnic studies. So, for example, in my classroom at Northridge, I have a lot of Armenian students. I have a lot of Jewish students. When I teach Chicano studies, in order to make it real for them, I am going to connect to their day-to-day reality, but I'm not going to change my lesson. So and that's a roundabout answer, but we did our homework. We're doing our best without appropriating Jewish studies, without diminishing the importance of each of the 4 disciplines.
Very helpful. A quick follow-up. I understand in 2021, there was a pushback and Governor Newsom and others created a different type of ethnic studies program. Did their program identify anti-Semitism and Jewish studies as a component?
Okay, because of the ethnic study, very good, Steve, you've done your homework. They actually did create an additional, they gave an additional, I don't know how many hundreds of $1,000s to create, to augment Jewish studies in K-12. And they also gave funding to, previous to that, to a model curriculum on genocide, right? That did include Jewish American studies, but it did not include other forms of genocide throughout the world.
So the shoe's on the other foot about excluding different groups. Thank you.
So can we challenge them for being anti-Semitic because Arabs who are Semites are not included?
You know, someone actually raised that, Carol Francis. That's not a bad idea.
Anthony?
Well, first of all, I just love your enthusiasm, and I wish I were a student in your class.
Thank you.
Because I think your approach is brilliant. As I was listening to this, it really seemed like a frivolous lawsuit in many ways. And I'm glad that your lawyers are pursuing that anti-slap approach. But it's clearly an attempt to chill you out, to stifle your work. And are you aware of this as a pattern across the country? Is this something that is happening in other states and other places? And is there, who's funding all of this? Obviously, it's an expensive to get lawyers and to engage in these kind of really lawsuits that are against freedom of speech.
Teresa, I can answer part of it and then please, like, what I leave out. Okay, so it's a very, very smart plan that the Zionist efforts have like rolled out. So I'll just say one thing. Yes, we believe it's a frivolous lawsuit. Our lawyers that have read it believe it as well. And I think the lawyers, the plaintiffs themselves also know. But the lawsuit is really what I think is like to control the narrative about ethnic studies, about teaching, Palestine. And the reason why I say that is because Teresa and I were like not even served when we were already getting phone calls from national news outlets about the lawsuit. The first time I received an email that said, we would like to talk to you about comment, concerned Jewish parents versus liberated ethnic studies. I thought it was like a kind of like rhetorical question, like just like in general, like about, I didn't understand that it was an actual lawsuit because I had not been served, yet it was already published. As soon as it was filed, the suit was already published on national news. And so that just shows me that they're really trying to like control the narrative about what ethnic studies is. And then, so we're like the first lawsuit in the way that they're doing this. There are several that have come later, and I'll let Teresa talk about that. But something else that we're seeing that's a pattern, and they're really like smart kind of like tentacle strategy, is they're doing records requests throughout the state. They are anyone who they get any kind of notion that are even like willing to even utter the word Palestine. They're asking for records against teachers, school board members, superintendents, principals, just like across the state. And what we're seeing, because we find out about these records requests, is it's a majority of them is from somebody named Michael Harris, right? And I mean, a lot of records requests across the state. We're also seeing that there's these like formed like emails that have gone out in mass to every like superintendent, school board candidate, principal. So what they're doing is, you know, they're questioning, they're putting ideas into superintendents across the state. Liberated Ethnic Studies as a nonprofit organization is in there, but there's also now this there's type of ethnic studies which they're calling liberated ethnic studies. So it's kind of like a proper noun and not a proper noun, like the way that they refer to liberated ethnic studies. And so who's funding it? You know, I can't really say, but we definitely see this pattern that is happening that freaks out school districts, which if you know, because as you know, a lot of administrators or even teachers, they are not knowledgeable on these issues, this topic on ethnic studies. Definitely, you know, I think since October 7th, we've seen an uptick in people being knowledgeable on what Zionism is. But before October 7th, I mean, you really had to like seek that information out to even really like know, unless you yourself are part of that movement. And so yeah, so that's kind of what we see happening right now.
There are a number of groups that are and I don't, you know, I can't pretend like they meet together or they planned in secrecy. You know, I imagine they speak to one another because they're very targeted, right? So you have the Brandeis Institute and the ADL recently sued Santa Ana School District, right, for lessons on Palestine. Lupe is correct about Stand With Us and Michael Harris. He seems to be doing the majority of public request forms. There's an organization created recently called the Alliance for Constructivist Ethnic Studies. If you look at who they are and their background, many of them are connected to some of the same organizations or even more right-wing organizations like the California Equal Rights. Don't quote me on this, I can get you the name later, but it's a foundation that sued the state of California over the teaching of the In Lakesh, right? The you are my other me. So there are a number of groups, and they have targeted not just California. They are targeting, you recently saw Minnesota, I don't know if you did, but Minnesota, you recently approved their history, social science standards and allowed for ethnic studies. They were attacked in the process of going for this bill. So they're organized, they are well-funded, and they are moving against ethnic studies. And I have to apologize for leaving a little early. If you see me get off, I broke an ankle bone, and I got to go to the doctor. So I'm trying to take as many of these as possible. I really wanted to be here.
Can you just explain SLAP? SLAPP? Because I mean, people are talking about SLAP. I'm not sure everybody knows about that.
Would it help if I did that quickly from a legal standpoint?
Yes.
So lawsuits that really seek to suppress free speech and free assembly, the rules in California and many states allow the defendants to quickly bring an anti-SLAP. The SLAP is whatever for that type of lawsuit. So it quickly brings before the court that this lawsuit has no substantial basis and it is intended to suppress free speech, free association, and they're very powerful motions brought by defendants like these defendants we have with us today. So it's a strong remedy. I'm glad it's being brought, and it will bring the issues quickly. And during the anti-SLAP, there's a stay on discovery because, as Lupe explained, these lawsuits often are brought just to burden people, take hundreds of personal hours of time to gather emails and documents and just deluge them in discovery requests. So the anti-SLAP motion stays discovery, and in the hands of Mark Kleinman, I bet that motion will prevail.
All right, Rick.
So I find this very interesting because it seems like the organizations and groups that have a certain agenda that they need to push have learned the value of public relations and of as you said, controlling a narrative. And you know, it's interesting because I think a lot of us that are from the progressive community make the assumption that everybody is working out of the best interest of the common good. And that's not always the case. So we assume that we're just, you know, we want to be respectful of everybody and everybody's going to reciprocate that way. That's not how it is. So I hope that you guys can prevail in this. I wanted to see also with the organization, or with Liberated Ethnic Studies. And one other thing I wanted to say, it's very telling that they want to make that phrase a kind of a focus. It's kind of like critical race theory is a specific study that is based in postgraduate education, but they decided that it's going to be really easy for them to appropriate it and define it for themselves and use it as a cudgel. So, I'm glad that you guys are getting ahead of that. I wanted to see with the organization that you have you experienced this with any other organization or any group or anything like that before, or is this something completely new that you've had to deal with?
For me, this is something new. I mean, I've September 11th, back in the day, I did receive that pushback because it all actually stemmed from, I took students to UCLA to a sweatshop labor, kind of not a conference, but like a panel. And my students brought back to school this pamphlet they received that says Q&A about the war on terrorism. And it was really about challenging this notion that you have to support war. And if you don't, then that makes you anti-American. And that's what got me sort of pushed out because of that little pamphlet. But aside from that, I personally have never been called, even back then, I wasn't called anti-Semitic. Obviously, it was kind of a different situation. This is my first experience with this. I've never been sued before or anything like that.
I would have to say the same for me. I'm in ethnic studies and I'm in Chicano studies. So there's been pushback on several things within my department, from, supporting the Central American liberation movements, to anti-apartheid. But in terms of anti-Semitism and being, taking a pro-Palestine stance, I have to say this has been the ugliest and the most heartbreaking of all the experiences I've had. And I always say, I'm a Chicano studies professor, so it's the question on Palestine has always been kind of a theoretical, intellectual position that I took. Of course, I'm going to support, land back, but it's never been something that I've had to wrestle with on a day-to-day. And I have gotten a really quick education about the entire movement because of this experience.
Yeah.
All right. Rebecca?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this this presentation. To address the question why they are doing this, I think it's because we are putting out there now information about the occupation, about Israel as an apartheid state. And now the narratives are coming out from people who have been there, who have seen it, like Carol Francis, like Marjorie Cohn, she talks about. And, I live in a mostly Jewish community in Agora Hills. And I've had friends who've gone to Israel and come back and tell these horror stories about how they see that they, as white people, can, take certain roads that, people of color or Palestinians or, anybody dark like me cannot, they tell me, don't go to Israel. And but these stories are coming out. And I was horrified when I saw the California Jewish Caucus letter come out. All of my California lawmakers signed that letter. And I knew about the false narratives behind it. What I didn't know, and I didn't realize until right now, is that your group was mentioned, in it. And when I went back and read the letter right now, I said, "Oh my God, that's them." But I already knew about the false narratives in there, and it's so I just wanted to ask, how can I help? Because this has been eating at me, that my lawmakers are now pushing these false narratives, and it goes deeper than that. I don't know if you heard about the Jewish protester that was killed by a pro-Palestinian protester. They've been pushing the false narrative that he was bludgeoned to death with a megaphone. He actually fell backwards and hit his head on a grate. And there was an altercation, but there's no evidence, and he was not charged with being bludgeoned the defendant was not charged, with bludgeoning him to death with a megaphone. Yet this is what they're saying. The Jewish Federation LA put out a press release, and Lindsay Horvath picked it up, and it went through, it got into the Israeli press too. It was distributed. Her statement, condemning it, was in the Israeli press the next day. And it really concerns me that that now the Jewish Federation LA seems to be attending every single LA County Board of Supervisor meeting. And yeah. I'm like, where's the Arab representation? Where's Carr? Why aren't they also it seems to me that the Board of Supervisors are just getting the narrative from Jewish Federation LA. And that is very harmful. So this is hard for me too personally, because these lawmakers, Henry Stern, who I donated to, and Jackie Irwin, they've helped me with my animal welfare legislation. They have supported me. Now I'm attacking them and saying, you guys are peddling in false narratives. And I've done it on social media. I know you have to go, but you wanted to tell you, let me know how I can help, because these are my lawmakers. I have their ear. I'm their constituent, and I'm going to make them tell the truth, stand in the truth.
Yeah, I do have to, my driver is here. I am
okay.
So appreciative of all of you. I know Lupe is going to stay on. Please, let's keep in touch. It's good to see those that I haven't seen for a really long time, and it's good to meet others. So thank you so much for having us on. I appreciate it.
Teresa,
yes.
Teresa, you are now a card-carrying member of ICUJP. Come back, join us. We'll work with Lupe, because we're an action-oriented group, and we want to find out how we can support you in your work.
Thank you so much. Much love, everyone.
I feel better.
I want to say I'm very grateful to Andy, and I'm going to try to make this brief question to Lupe. I believe that Teresa mentioned an organization called the Brandeis Institute. Mm-hmm. I'm curious about that, and I would like to come back to the Brandeis Institute, but my main question for you, Lupe, is about your students and the student body in your institution in general. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is not a fair question, but do you feel that African American students and Latino students understand the oppression of the Palestinian people and the occupation of their land and the stealing of their resources along with their freedom. Do you find that students of color generally understand the Palestine question better than other students, or they have a greater sympathy for this than other students?
Okay, that's a really good question, and the answer is no, they don't. A lot of times our especially our our Chicano Latino students don't really know their own history. This is a huge problem, which is why we have fought for ethnic studies. And then with the law that was passed, AB 101, it mandates 1 semester only of ethnic studies. And that 1 semester is, as Teresa shared earlier, is supposed to cover like an introduction to the, Chicano Latino studies, Native American studies, Black studies, AAPI studies. So there's a lot that's supposed to be crammed into 1 semester. So to say that the students are really going to be knowledgeable and in depth about any of the groups is we do our best as educators. And then with the topic of Palestine, I mean, there are so many teachers that are afraid to even say Palestine, like even when we've met people since October 7th, especially, who are sharing with us their lack of understanding because they've never, been taught, or, the history hasn't been out there. So they want to know themselves about the history of Zionism. And then some of them are afraid to then teach it, right? Because of for the exact reason, that we've been sued. Teachers have been fired. They're right now, and even in LA Unified, there are teachers that are without a job since October 7th. And it's simply for, being anti-Zionist, not for anything anti-Semitic, because that's the issue with that definition. And I think that's something where we can really, with our legislators, really push this notion of denouncing that IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, because if you critique Israel, immediately you're considered anti-Semitic. And of course, to me, I feel disingenuous when I say this, but I'm going to say it, I am absolutely not anti-Semitic. I have had many Jewish friends. I used to live in Agora Hills as well. In middle school, I went to Lindero County Middle School. I've been to bat mitzvahs because that put me in that area of the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah because that's the age group that I was. I've been to synagogue with my friends when I spent the night at their homes on the weekend. I hate that I have to justify and qualify that, I would, and I know Teresa and I know many of the others on our Liberated Ethnic Studies would actively not create, because it's not our area of expertise, but support any legislation, any curriculum that actively is going to fight against real anti-Semitism, not this if you're anti-Zionist, I'm talking about real anti-Semitism, because I know that it does exist. It does not exist in my students. My students, who are mainly of Mexican, Central American, Black, well, a majority of my students, I would say a good 93% are of Central American and Mexican descent. And then I have Black students and Asian students. I've never, ever heard any type of slur that is anti-Jewish in my career, from teachers, from colleagues, and from students. And that's from where I teach, the demographics of the students where I teach. But I would actively support, any curriculum or any program to combat that in schools in general. On my campus, the issue that, the solidarity issue that we really need to work on is this anti-Blackness, the use of the N-word that's very pop culture. That's something that we are really, really struggling with. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question. In terms of the other institute, I'm not as familiar on that. I cannot respond to that. That would be Teresa, Teresa and some of our other colleagues that are in the leadership roles of Liberated.
Okay, I just wasn't sure whether I heard correctly that it was the Brandeis Institute. I wasn't, I didn't hear very clearly, and so I'm maybe Steve Rohde and I could discuss the history of Louis Brandeis. He may
Yeah,
not.
later I'm really concerned about time.
I'll
so-
clarify later if you come back to me.
Yeah.
Ruby, I saw your hand go up, but Andy.
Okay, I'll make mine real quick. And it's probably more a question for Teresa, but maybe for you too, Lupe. One of the things that got me into ICUJP was losing my job as a teacher. And but one of my questions, it wasn't specifically about this, but it led to this. It was part of it. How are the unions responding? Because one of the things that happened is that we were, in a sense, thrown under the bus by the union. Not totally, but because of wanting to bring this question to the union hall itself.
That's a really good question. So this lawsuit against Liberated Ethnic Studies has my name on it. Sorry about that. It has Teresa Montaño. It has Cecily Meyer Cruz, who's the president of UTLA. It has UTLA. And then it has as a, I can't remember the name. I think it says nominal or some other, it has LAUSD listed on there as well. Okay, so we have been trying to organize people under the Liberated 2. We have not added Cecily's name to that, not because of anything like I support Cecily Meyer Cruz, but as the president, she has received death threats. She's definitely received threats of Zionist members who are threatening to leave the union and take people en masse with them. So politically, I think she's in a different kind of position than we are. But how they've responded, I mean, right now there's the active UTLA Teachers for a Ceasefire that have been actively trying to push motions, not just for a ceasefire, but for, further motions as well. They've received a lot of pushback. I'm really happy that one of the main leaders of that is a self-loving Jew named Hannah Day, who has been supporting that. And at our the last area meetings, I think it was 5 out of 7 areas did pass the motion, which is kind of like a baby step motion, which is calling for teachers to be able to teach and be protected by their union. I would say, similar to like the legislators, a lot of our leaders freak out once the Zionists actively organize against them and have not really used their political power and backbone to say no. They kind of toe the line and try to, be multiple perspectives as opposed to really standing firm in support of being able to teach, teach about Palestine and to say no, like Israel's a state, and to critique Israel is not to critique a whole group of people, right? And so they haven't done that. They haven't done that. They've folded even the two original writers of these major ethnic studies bills that have resulted in this requirement, who are both Chicano Latino. They have even sort of folded as well. Jose Medina and Luis Alejo, they're very proud of their ethnic studies bill, but they also kind of like fold to this idea that if you teach Palestine, that equals anti-Semitism.
Okay, Sophia?
Thank you, Lupe, for being here.
Thank you.
I did want to point out that when I was following the lawsuit, that Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton, put a lot of energy in exposing it. And so I follow the money. And when you have someone that big pushing and focusing on that, and then focusing on LAUSD, that's why there's a lot of money, because there's a lot of money behind Judicial Watch. And so I just wanted to point that out. And also, I just hope, I'm sorry you moved, you know, I found out you were not in the neighborhood anymore, but it's important that you also take care of yourself, sister, you know, doing all this, it's hard. And I just wanted to say thank you for joining us, and anything you need, we're here for you.
Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that a lot. And it definitely, like, being in this space right now is part of that, like, self-care, because you know that you're not alone. And then, you know, like, of course, when I get that sort of love and support from both my Jewish relatives and my Palestinian relatives, like, that really, really, really motivates and keeps me grounded and from not, like, getting overwhelmed. So thank you for saying that, and thank you all for having us here today, because that really does allow us to feel like we're not alone.
Gathering up a few things in response to Dave. The Brandeis Institute has no affiliation with Brandeis University, but you're absolutely right. Louis Brandeis was the first Jew on the Supreme Court. I applaud him for his decisions on free speech, on labor. He was a labor lawyer and a very important justice on the court. But he had feet of clay and lost his way when it came to Zionism. Although I have some hope that today he would bemoan the suppression of free speech. The students for justice in Palestine have been demonized by the Brandeis Institute. Their chapters have been shut down on various campuses already. I put in the chat a piece I did for the Daily Northwestern student newspaper in Northwestern, where students for justice in Palestine have been attacked. And it particularly analyzes how the ADL and the Brandeis Center have accused the Students for Justice in Palestine of providing material support to terrorism. They have doubled down and cranked up the accusations so that demonstrations and speeches that they give to support Palestinian rights are treated as if they are the support of terrorism. Turning back to you, Lupe, can you link what you're doing, or to put it a different way, across the country, teachers are under attack. Florida, Texas, and other states have passed laws that restrict the teaching of ethnic studies. They restrict the teaching of the 1619 Project and CRT, as Rick pointed out. Now, there are lawsuits pending. Many of those laws have been enjoined because federal courts have gotten a hold of them and seen them as a threat to academic freedom and free speech. How do you see your work, the targeting of you as a teacher as part of resisting this national movement to erase? I mean, ethnic studies, another name for ethnic studies is American history. It's American history that has oppressed these groups, and the original sin of slavery and the eradication of Native Americans. So we have a little bit of time. Put it in that national context, and are you working in solidarity with other groups around the country?
So yes, so we are working in solidarity with groups through another organization that sprung out of Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Consortium, and that's the Coalition for Liberated Ethnic Studies, which gets a little confusing. In retrospect, we should have named it something different. But the Coalition for Liberated Ethnic Studies includes organizations like Chito, which are out of Arizona. It includes the Ethnic Studies Network of Texas. It includes organizations in Washington that are doing, so it's a national organization. And so we get regular kind of reports on what's going on. And one of the, I guess the overarching messages is that we are very spoiled, relatively speaking, to the rest of the country. Like, we have been able to, you know, have a lot of like teach-ins and webinars and conferences, and comparatively to some of the other states have been able to do really good work here. You know, aside from obviously like this lawsuit and all of these other, you know, really organized efforts to stop us from doing it. In states where I've been, you know, because of my union work, my national union work, and then also the Coalition for Liberated Ethnic Studies, I have heard from educators and from legislators from, you know, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, and other states, either on the East Coast or in the South. And, you know, it's really scary. It's really, really scary. When I have been able to speak with them on CRT and on ethnic studies, I start to feel really naive about how to organize, because our organizing here in California is necessary, and we need to amp it up. We need more support, but it's really mild compared to what we're seeing. Like I was actually invited by the AFT and the NEA, the National Education Association, to go to the I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's the National African American State Legislators organization that exists. I was invited to go and speak to them on CRT, and to hear the frustration and the heartbreak and even the fear that these state legislators were experiencing, seeing, like what was said earlier, like that one of the most horrific things in human history that's ever occurred, right? The Holocaust of slavery be wiped out and made illegal to teach when you are like an ancestor of this. It's so frustrating. So right now we're in a very frustrating time in history where state laws, you know, around education, state laws in general are really anti-truth. That's what's happening, yes, on a national level. And so this lawsuit, I think, is going to be very helpful in, you know, part of that sort of story, because if it is dismissed with prejudice, it's going to be a precedent that's going to really show that equating, you know, critique of Zionism is not anti-Semitism. So that's a piece in that bigger, you know, because what we're seeing is it will allow like the fallacy of equating one thing with another as like not acceptable in education. And then hopefully we can use that as we continue to fight, you know, across the country. Yeah.
Carl Francis, can I have a minute for a follow-up?
Okay.
Only because breaking news, I wrote to Mark Clayman telling him you were on our seminar. He writes, and there's information in here for everybody. Good morning, Steve. How grand to hear from you. He explains that the UTLA is represented by a really serious law firm that came out of the Venice Bar Sinister, it was called, that they have filed a serious anti-SLAPP motion. Opposition's been filed, but as you said, the judge canceled the hearing and took the matter under submission. This happens in federal court sometimes. The judge doesn't need an oral hearing. He's got all the paperwork. And Mark ends by saying, I cannot resist the temptation to inflict upon you the operative complaint, which includes 40 some paragraphs delving into the Talmud, the Psalms. Would that I were joking. So the plaintiffs have loaded it up, and this plaintiff's lawyer filed the first Trump suit to attack the 2020 election in Pennsylvania. I think you said that. So we're all going to hear more about that case, and thank you for being such a stalwart yourself.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I wanted to finish us off with the question. Rebecca asked, what can I do? And what I'm asking is, what can we do? What can ICUJP do? Will there be anything where having people in a courtroom or having people protesting or writing letters or anything that we could do? And would you keep us in touch if anything like that comes up?
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely keep you informed on what's going on. And it looks like Steve probably will have breaking news from Mark as well. So definitely, I think we don't have a court date. So like packing the courtroom, if we ever were to get one, would be great, like respectfully packing the courtroom. But I definitely think that letter writing and like a very strategic letter writing campaign, which we are so spread thin that we're like, we don't have the capacity to organize something like that is really smart in the manner that they have done. I think that is something that we really need. Like, we really need the voices of folks that say, you know, liberated ethnic studies is exactly what our students need. You know, let's not continue this dehumanization. You know, and let's support this into schools, not just Liberated Ethnic Studies as the organization, but Liberated Ethnic Studies, right, as this like new ethnic studies concept. You know, folks who are supporting curriculum writing, content writing, pedagogical like instruction that is supportive of this is what needs to happen. And it needs to also explicitly say that Palestine is not, teaching Palestine is not anti-Semitism.
Letter writing to whom?
Letter writing, I would say to legislators, but also, you know, other people in positions of power like superintendents across the state of California, school board members across the state of California. That is something that they have done, like the Zionists have done really, really well. And I've seen it because people tell us like, we just got this letter, we just got this email. So I've seen that they're form letters. They're not like individual like researched letters. They're form letters that have gone out in mass via email and hard copy that are maligning like Liberated Ethnic Studies and anybody who is, because there are other organizations that are doing the work that we're doing as well, and we've all been working together, and it's just like in mass, just like, you know, just totally like misrepresenting who we are and what we're about.
Okay. Rick, you had your hand up?
Thank you. So I think that's a really good point, Lupe, and I think that is one thing that is one of the big divides between the progressive community and others, is that the messaging is more inclusive and more accurate with us. The other side is more organized.
Yeah.
That accounts for a lot. So with something like this, I think it's really endemic for us to maybe have a discussion later. I know you guys drew up a banner about, you know, a future for future event at a courthouse. When we get that date, that's going to be great to send out. It's also going to be really good, you know, as Carol Francis alluded to, you know, getting a press release and getting the narrative going, and finding, you know, making sure that the constituent organizations that are going to be supporting you are in the loop and stuff. That this is a really good way for us to flex our organizational muscles and get them get them going a little bit more. So whenever you guys want to sidebar, we can do that and see where we can go.
Thank you. That's very much appreciated. Thank you.